crushed under one of the biggest
Gotti, I'm so sorry. I have to interrupt you. President Biden has finally taken the podium at the White House. We are going to go to an NBC News special report.
Here's Lester Holt.
Good afternoon. We're coming on the air with breaking news. Just moments from now, President Biden will update the nation on his administration's efforts to keep Russian President Vladimir Putin from ordering an invasion of Ukraine. President Biden has just concluded a call with NATO allies regarding the crisis. All this comes amid an increasing buildup of Russia's military troops on Ukraine's borders and new accusations today of cyber attacks. The president, we should be seeing him momentarily in the Roosevelt Room as we wait for him to prepare. Let me go to Kristen Welker right now at the White House. Kristen, do we have more guidance as to what we'll hear from the president?
Well, Lester, this is the second time that President Biden will speak to the American people about the situation in Ukraine this week, and it underscores that this is an intensifying crisis. I am told that he is going to emphasize there is still a path to diplomacy and the efforts at deterrence that are underway. Now, remember, just yesterday, he said that an invasion by Russia into Ukraine could come in a matter of days. So he sees this as an opportunity to update the American people as we head into what will undoubtedly be a critical weekend. Now, it comes on the heels of that conversation that you mentioned, Lester, with transatlantic leaders. It lasted about 48 minutes. It also comes as top officials here confirmed this afternoon that the administration has now assessed that Russia is behind those cyber attacks against the defense ministry and key banks in Ukraine. That is significant because the administration has long said those are the types of actions that could precede any invasion. The shelling that we are seeing in Ukraine, another type of action that the U.S. has warned about. So those efforts at diplomacy have been going on behind the scenes, Lester. Yeah,
a defense official saying a destabilization campaign has begun. 40 to 50% of Russian forces along the border are in attack position, according to a defense official, as we again wait the president to emerge there in the Roosevelt Room to bring us up to date with the very latest. Let me go to Richard Engel right now. He's inside Ukraine. Richard, this disinformation campaign, are you seeing it where you are? What's the temperature on the ground?
Well, the temperature is getting a lot higher, and we are absolutely in the middle of what feels like an elaborate disinformation campaign. There is a part of this country controlled by Russian-backed separatists. It has been controlled by Russian-backed separatists for the last 8 years. And for the last 24 hours, those separatists have been claiming that they are under attack by the Ukrainian military, that they are in a position where they need to evacuate. In fact, the separatist leaders today put out a call for all of the pro-Russian community living in that area. There's about 2 million people living in an area adjacent to Russia, to get in their cars, starting with men, women, children, and the elderly first, and to get out of the country. And there are reports in Russia that Vladimir Putin is promising to pay each family forced to leave, forced to escape because of an impending Ukrainian invasion, the equivalent of $130.
All right, Richard, here's the president.
Today, I made 2 vital calls, as I've been making for some months now. 2 vital calls that on the situation in Russia and Ukraine. The first was to a bipartisan group of members of Congress who are currently representing the United States, along with Vice President Harris at the Munich Security Conference. The second was the latest in a series of calls over the past many months with the heads of state of our NATO allies and the European Union, to bring them up to date on what the United States thinks is the current state of affairs and what's likely to happen in Ukraine in the coming days, to ensure that we continue to remain in lockstep, that is, the European Union and NATO. Despite Russia's efforts to divide us at home and abroad, I can affirm that has not happened. The overwhelming message of both calls was one of unity, determination, and resolve. I shared with all of those on the calls what we know about a rapidly escalating crisis in Ukraine. Over the last few days, we've seen reports of a major uptick in violations of the ceasefire by Russian-backed fighters attempting to provoke Ukraine in the Donbass. For example, a shelling of a Ukrainian kindergarten yesterday, which Russia has falsely asserted was carried out by Ukraine. We also continue to see more and more disinformation being pushed out to the Russian public, including Russian-backed separatists, claiming that Ukraine is planning to launch a massive offensive attack in the Donbass. Well, look, there is simply no evidence of these assertions, and it defies basic logic to believe the Ukrainians would choose this moment, with well over 150,000 troops arrayed on its borders, to escalate a year-long conflict. Russia's state media also continues to make phony allegations of a genocide taking place in the Donbass and push fabricated claims warning about Ukraine's attack on Russia without any evidence. That's just what I'm sure Ukraine's thinking of doing, attacking Russia. All of these are consistent with the playbook the Russians have used before to set up a false justification to act against Ukraine. This is also in line with the pretext scenarios that the United States and our allies and partners have been warning about for weeks. Throughout these tense moments, the Ukrainian forces have shown great judgment and, I might add, restraint. They refused to allow the Russians to bait them into war. But the fact remains, Russian troops currently have Ukraine surrounded from Belarus along the Russian border and with Ukraine to the Black Sea in the south and all of its border. You know, look, we have reason to believe the Russian forces are planning to and intend to attack Ukraine in the coming week, in the coming days. We believe that they will target Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, a city of 2.8 million innocent people. We're calling out Russia's plans loudly and repeatedly, not because we want a conflict, but because we're doing everything in our power to remove any reason that Russia may give to justify invading Ukraine and prevent them from moving. Make no mistake, if Russia pursues its plans, it will be responsible for a catastrophic and needless war of choice. The United States and our allies are prepared to defend every inch of NATO territory from any threat to our collective security as well. We also will not send troops in to fight in Ukraine, but we will continue to support the Ukrainian people. This past year, the United States has provided a record amount of security assistance to Ukraine to bolster its defensive, $650 million from Javelin missiles to ammunition. We also previously provided $500 million in humanitarian aid and economic support for Ukraine. And earlier this week, we also announced an additional sovereign loan guarantee of up to $1 billion to strengthen Ukraine's economic resilience. But the bottom line is this: the United States and our allies and partners will support the Ukrainian people. We will hold Russia accountable for its actions. The West is united and resolved. We're ready to impose severe sanctions on Russia if it further invades Ukraine. But I say again, Russia can still choose diplomacy. It is not too late to de-escalate and return to the negotiating table. Last night, Russia agreed that Secretary of State Blinken and Foreign Minister Lavrov should meet on February 24th in Europe. But if Russia takes military action before that date, we'll be clear that they have slammed the door shut on diplomacy. They will have chosen war, and they will pay a steep price for doing so, not only from the sanctions that we and our allies will impose on Russia, but the moral outrage the rest of the world will visit upon them. You know, there are many issues that divide our nation and our world, but standing up to Russian aggression is not one of them. The American people are united. Europe is united. The transatlantic community is united. Our political parties in this country are united. The entire free world is united. Russia has a choice between war and all the suffering it will bring, or diplomacy that will make a future safer for everyone. Now, I'm happy to take a few questions. Nancy from Bloomberg.
Thank you so much, sir. Do you think that it is wise for President Zelensky to leave Ukraine if an invasion is as imminent as the U.S. says it is?
That's a judgment for him to make, and a determination as to whether or not. I've spoken with Zelensky a dozen times, maybe more, I don't know. and it's in the pursuit of a diplomatic solution. It may not be it may be the wise choice, but it's his decision.
And do you have any indication about whether President Putin has made a decision on whether to invade? Do you feel confident that he hasn't made that decision already?
As of this moment, I'm convinced he's made the decision. We have reason to believe that.
There seems to be a unanimity, a spirit between the United States and Europe to do some sanctions, the comprehensive sanctions, but is everyone on board with the exact same sanctions that you want to do?
Yes. There will be some slight differences, but there'll be more add-ons than subtractions.
And President Putin is going to oversee some nuclear drills this weekend. How do you see that happening? What's your reaction to that, sir? Thank you.
Well, I don't think he is remotely contemplating using nuclear weapons. But I do think I think he is focused on trying to convince the world that he has the ability to change the dynamics in Europe in a way that he cannot. But I don't, how much of it is a cover for just saying we're just doing exercises and there's more than that, I just can't, it's hard to read his mind.
Mr. President, to be clear, you are convinced that President Putin is going to invade Ukraine. Is that what you just said a few moments ago?
Yes, I did. Yes.
So is diplomacy off the table then?
No. Until he does, diplomacy is always a possibility.
What reason do you have to believe he's considering that option at all?
We have a significant intelligence capability. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
President Biden with brief remarks and taking a few questions, as you can see there, saying he's convinced that Russia, Vladimir Putin, has made the decision to invade. The president continued to talk about coming days and the coming week. As for the timing, the president also noting that the Russians are following what he refers to as a playbook of disinformation, false flag type operations, destabilization efforts within the media in Russia as a pretext to invasion. We want to go to NBC News Chief White House correspondent Kristen Welker. And Kristen, notably, the president said there is a planned meeting between Secretary Blinken and his Russian counterpart, but that all really depends on whether the Russians begin the invasion or not.
That's right. That meeting, he said, will not take place if Russia does decide to invade. And I just want to emphasize the significance of the news that we just heard. We have asked the president and top officials here for the past several days if they thought that Putin had made a final decision about whether to invade. And for the very first time, we heard from the president himself that he believes that they have assessed that, yes, President Putin has decided to invade Ukraine. That is hugely significant. Now, you also heard him say, yes, there is still a path to diplomacy, and that meeting set to take place next week between Secretary Blinken and his Russian counterpart. This is really an all-hands-on-deck effort, Lester. At diplomacy, you have the vice president, who is in Munich right now, along with the Secretary of State, holding high-level talks. And it comes as we have reported today that the administration does have some real concern about President Zelensky leaving his country in these critical hours to attend that conference in Munich as well. He is scheduled to meet with the vice president, so it is certainly a critical meeting. You heard the president there pressed on that reporting, and he said that ultimately it is up to President Zelensky to decide if this is the right time and a safe time for him to leave his country. But again, the big headline here is that President Biden saying that they have assessed that President Putin has made a decision to invade Ukraine. The window for diplomacy clearly closing every minute, Lester, but they are still on that path of continuing those talks. When I asked the press secretary earlier today why continue to talk when the window for diplomacy is closing, she said, what other option is there? Lester.
Kristen Welker, thank you. Let me bring in NBC News chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel. Richard, something else we heard from the president is the belief that Kyiv, the capital, will be targeted. You've obviously spent a lot of time there. Any sense that that's a city, a big city, that is ready to order evacuations or take defensive actions in that view?
Well, I think defensive action, certainly. And Kyiv is a city that is willing to fight. There have been recent opinion polls that suggest that Kyiv and other cities to the far west will resist, that the army will try its best to fight in a stand-up fight, but then it will eventually, perhaps after days, be forced to go underground. Here in the east, there are a lot of army divisions, and soldiers we've been speaking to say they too will fight, but it will obviously be a tough fight. They are up against the Russian military. Russia has about half of its combat power, according to Courtney Kube over at the Pentagon, currently on the borders. So if Russia were to unleash that combat power, it could come in from multiple directions. It could come from Belarus, which is just about 50 miles. The Belarusian border is about 50 miles from Kiev. It could cross in multiple locations in the east. They could do marine landings coming in the south, where I am right now. That is if they go for this maximalist option. But what we were talking about right before President Biden walked into the room is how this potentially could start. And it's something that President Biden was talking about, a false flag, a fake operation. And that seems to be what we are living in right now. For the last 24 hours, Russian-backed separatists, and there are about 2 million of them, they live in an enclave not far from here, have been claiming that they are under attack by the Ukrainian military. And it seems preposterous that the Ukrainian military would choose this time, when so much Russian forces are assembled around the borders, to launch an attack at one of Russia's allies. There's no evidence that they are launching this attack, but that is what Russia is claiming. That is what the Russian media are claiming. People in the separatist areas have begun to evacuate, claiming that they are under fire by the Ukrainian military. And the next step would be for potentially Russia to say, we are moving in to save our fellow Russian compatriots who are being attacked by the Ukrainian military. And again, I have to say, as far as our reporting is going and as far as what the Ukrainians are saying, that is not true. The separatists are not being attacked.
Richard Engel inside Ukraine. Richard, thank you again. The big headline here, the president making a statement, taking questions, saying he is convinced that Russia has made the decision to go forward with its invasion of Ukraine. The question is when and exactly where. We continue to follow it all. That concludes our coverage of President Biden's remarks on the Ukraine crisis. We'll have much more tonight on NBC Nightly News. I'm Lester Holt in New York. Good day, everyone.
I'm Hallie Jackson, and this is Hallie Jackson Now on